idea, the premises of that is to share some of the things that you were doing, connecting with our city and what Portland can do as a model to other places,
Right.
but also have just a conversation about you, getting to know you, and maybe a
Get to know
second
me.
opportunity after the 2,000 people
Yeah, yeah.
to get to
Try
know you better.
repair my reputation. All right, we're rolling?
Oh yeah. So I would like to start asking the beginning of doesn't need to be that deep, but mainly why do you do what you do?
Yeah, that's actually a good question because I grew up in an environment in the South in a town called Stone Mountain. It's famous because it's mentioned in Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. He says, freedom rings from the hills and the molehills of Mississippi and from Stone Mountain in Georgia. I sound just like him, I know.
Right?
And the reason he mentioned my town, that I didn't know at the time, is because it was the birthplace of the modern Ku Klux Klan in 1915. And we had a Klan in our town, we had a Klan rally. I knew people who were in the Klan, and it was sort of a normal way of thinking. Their ideology, even though my parents weren't involved in it, but although some of my friends' parents were involved in it, was sort of the way of thinking about the world. Sort of the idea that black people represent a threat, that they represent a threat to property values, they represent a safety threat. And so I grew up with that fear and the notion that my world, which was the white definition of America, was somehow under attack. We had very little diversity in my town. There was one Jewish kid, Neil Bartman, and I was taught that he had horns. Yeah.
Wow. How big was the city?
Well, it was probably about 4,000 or 5,000. Very
Okay.
small town outside of Atlanta. But Atlanta started to grow, so Stone Mountain kind of became a suburb. So it did become more diverse. As more people, we moved there from somewhere else as well. So that was sort of the way of thinking about the world, and I digested some of it because it reaffirmed my status, especially as a young male. You know, it kind of empowered me that I had the Klan, or I had these kind of scary people defending me. But it also didn't sit right. It didn't sit right with the music that I liked, which especially in the early days of punk rock was, very anti-racist bands like The Clash.
Right.
So it never really fully added up to me, even though I kind of dipped into some of that racist rhetoric at times. In high school I wrote an essay about, it was entitled, "If they have Black History Month, why don't we have White History Month?" And the teacher should have said, "Randy, go get your history book. Every month is White History Book." But she just said, and I remember very clearly, "That's a very strong opinion, Randy." She didn't challenge me on it. And so I, had no reason to think that it was incorrect or illogical or not factual thinking. And then I went to college to work in the medical profession, and I took a sociology class, and that intro sociology class sort of split my mind wide open. I could really see what it was all about. I could see that often when we complain about race, we're really complaining about class and where those class differences come from, and it just sort of like this huge light bulb went off. And so I decided at that point that unpacking my own racism as well as the racism in the world I live in is going to be sort of my
I was gonna
main
say,
focus.
would you say that you used to live in a bubble in a way, right? Because we didn't
Yeah.
know that. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the start of it, and then so we're in the 1980s, and I was part of the punk rock scene in Atlanta. We had a skinhead gang pop up. They were called the Old Glory Skins, and we would often kind of have violent interactions with them. Anytime we were protesting whatever Ronald Reagan was doing that week, the skinheads would show up to attack us or to be kind of counter-protesters. So, which was very confusing to me because I kind of thought all young radical people were kind of left by that, on the left side at that point. But my first encounter is when I was 18, I went to school in London. I had a little job at a health center, at a clinic out in the suburbs, so I hopped on the train at Victoria Station every day, and I hopped onto this train, and just as it was pulling out, there were these skinheads on it. And I'm like, oh yeah, we're all part of the same thing. And they had markers, and they were writing swastikas on the wall of the train carriage, and I thought, oh, wait a second. These guys are, and then they looked at me and were like,
Like, who are you
yeah.
again?
Yeah, so I got off on the next stop after that. So that was my first introduction to the skinheads. And so then, by the time I'm in graduate school, we're having pretty serious conflicts with the skinheads in Atlanta, and there's stories about skinheads around the rest of the country, including here in Portland. And so I changed my focus. I was studying my first focus as a graduate student was studying the birth of the global economy, and I was looking at shipping trends in the Netherlands in the 1500s. It's kind of boring. And then a bunch of skinheads stole my Vespa scooter and set it on fire as a warning to me. And I thought, I need to find out what's going on here. So I started my work really studying white supremacists then.
I was going to say, for people that don't know, you are a professor of criminology and researcher of hate
sociology.
Crime. Sociology.
Yeah, that's what I do. I'm the hate crime guy. You may have seen this face before on CNN or the Sally Jesse Raphael show. That was my favorite one.
It was?
Yeah, or the O'Reilly Factor. That was probably
you did that.
I refer to that as my 4 minutes of shame. I can say that now that he's gone.
He's gone?
Yeah.
But do you feel how much of that encounter of someone getting your scooter on fire kind of pushed you to be who you are right now, or at least started the conversation?
Yeah, it did. It did, and part of it was because I knew people like that growing up. I knew people who waved the rebel flag and thought, maybe there was something to this Hitler guy, and I knew of them, and I didn't think of them as monsters or cartoon characters of evil. They were just the products of their environment. So I thought because I was a young white male at the time, I could dive into that world.
Right.
And so I started a kind of the sociological term is ethnographic, a field study of skinheads. And so on and off for 6 years, I was kind of inside the white supremacist movement. And then when the murder in Portland happened in November of 1988, I was actually kind of embedded with a group of skinheads in Orlando, Florida, and they were very excited about the murder. Yeah, they saw it as a blow against the immigrants and against brown people, and because they, in their mind, and they still do, believe that there's a coming race war, some type of race reckoning, and that it will happen on the streets, and then it will happen. Timothy McVeigh in the Oklahoma City bombing he envisioned starting a race war through that attack of the federal government. They believe the federal government is controlled by Jews, so it's all it's very heroic, especially for young males who. Their dads got laid off on the factory, and kind of the old version of John Wayne masculinity is gone, so it's very macho, kind of like street gangs. There's a direct parallel to street gangs.
Do you remember that movie? I don't know if you've seen it. It's a German movie called The Wave.
No.
Have you seen that?
No, I don't know.
It's a beautiful movie. I think I still have the DVD. I can lend you to see.
Yeah.
It's about this school teacher, and he's explaining in German, for explaining how powerful the Nazi war, and he created a little group in a class, and they created a logo, which was a wave, and how powerful. It's kind of what you're saying, like the importance of not just males, but males even more, but the younger generation be part of a group, and suddenly they start to defend themselves. And it's a great, crazy movie.
Yeah, there are similar social psychological experiments like that, like the Stanford Prison experiment, where you have one group of people defined as the inmates and the other as the guards. And of course, in 2 minutes, the guards are abusing the inmates because they have this sense of collective power.
Right.
So yeah, that's the start of it. So that's the short version of how I got to this position. And if you would have told me in 1987, when I really decided to take this project on, that I would be doing this 30 years later, still talking about it, and talking about it, reaching all the way to the top of the White House, I probably would have cried because. It seemed like we were figuring it out, and then it sort of, history is not a straight line, and so you have to recognize that we're going to slip backwards a little bit.
Are you still surprised that we're still talking about and dealing with the same problems?
Yeah, I am, because we're an increasingly non-white country. The Census Bureau says by the year 2050, the piece of the American pie that's white will be smaller than the non-white. And of course, the non-white is a whole bunch of different people.
I was going to say, when you gave that talk, and I told you, when I gave that talk for the humanist group, and you showed that the graphic, and now it's kind of 50 to 60% white, and white nationalists, or people that are, whatever you call radicals, they love the idea, but out of the 60%, what's the percentage that is radicals? Because here we can have women, we can have people that are open mind, people that actually love it.
Well, their notion is the same problem. They think all non-white people, including you, are all kind of meeting together and plotting that when they're 51%, this is what they're going to do to white people. So all Asians, which like Asian, the Asian population is just like so diverse. Like that includes Filipinos and people from northern Japan and southern Japan.
India.
Right. Yeah. So it's not like they're all kind of in a room together. They're very. So, but also white people are also very divided. I mean, so the danger of that is, so the answer to your first question is, I thought, as America becomes browner, these things will fade away just because majority rules, and people will suddenly have neighbors that are Muslim or have neighbors that are Pakistani or Guatemalan, and they'll be like, well, my neighbor is Guatemalan and he's not lazy. They'll have more contact, and the evidence is that is happening. The evidence is that people have a more diverse social network, and so overwhelmingly the picture is good.
Right.
There is a little subpart of that white slice that feels this is their country and they're losing it, and if they don't do something quick, we used to use the acronym WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Right.
Like the WASP picture of America will be gone, and it will be gone because it was never really there in the first place.
I was gonna say, and what's the bad thing about that?
Well, so that they feel desperate, and they feel this is their last. Just the people that I study, and this includes the white nationalists that have been marching in Portland. They feel that if they don't act now, they're going to lose the country. So there's this whole notion of the Second American Revolution. And this is what Timothy McVeigh was trying to do, that you have to use violence because the system is corrupt, it's a swamp, and it has to be drained or purged or burned to the ground to save America for the true WASP people. And the irony is that most white Americans' families came here in between 1870 and 1930. That was the great wave of European immigration. So I don't know if it's most, but a lot of Latino people were already here. They weren't immigrants, right? The line crossed them. And then most African Americans, they stopped importing slaves in the 1820s. So most African Americans are more American than most white people in this country.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So when I hear white people say, well, we founded, I'm like, well, what?
Who are we?
Were you here in 1776? Well, my family. Well, when did your family immigrate? 1892. Well, then you didn't do it. Stop that. But that's
it's
applying
good to share that. It's good to
yeah.
share that, and the idea is to share this video as much as we can, because a lot of people they hear things and it just repeats, becomes like a repetition machine kind of thing.
Sure.
So it's nice to go back to the history.
I'll clarify that.
That's
as
real.
many times as I have to.
Okay.
Anyway, so the danger is, the Timothy McVeighs and the Jeremy Christian who idolized Timothy McVeigh, he was the Max Stabber, and many other people. So I have to, even though people are often critical of the federal government, the FBI has thwarted so many domestic terrorist events that were pretty catastrophic if they would happen, including blowing up dams and blowing up power stations and blowing up Martin Luther King parades. And, this stuff is happening all the time, kind of on a low level that we don't really see it, especially since there's such a focus on Islamic terrorism, right, that term. Anyway, so that's my world. So that's why. Let me finish answering the first question. So I generally thought it would be better, like we're getting better, but I kind of forgot about that desperate little sliver that feels like if they don't act now, and at some point they'll be gone.
They'll be gone. What's the percentage? What's this group?
Yeah, that's a hard thing to tell because I think with the rise of the alt-right, it's growing. There is a new permission thanks to the president. I mean,
that's the question, but I love this conversation because I think I mentioned before, but this Indian guy one day mentioned this idea. If you are in the room holding a candle, and you might think the room is clean, but you can just see around you. Suddenly someone turns on the light and you see all the dirt there. So do you feel these people appear out of nowhere, or they've always been there?
Yeah, they have been there, and they kind of kept their mouths shut during the Obama years. But the difference is now they're organizing. So they may have been sort of sitting in their mother's basement complaining about the Kenyan Muslim president on their internet and kind of maybe talking with some other people on Reddit or 4chan, but now they're formally organizing, they're having conferences. They just had a conference in Seattle, and they are coming out and organizing themselves as a out wing of the conservative movement on the far right end.
Right.
So, and then the concern, and so here we are, we're back, it's like 1988 again. I mean, we're kind of back where we were when the skinheads were doing that. And the question is how many, now that they don't shave their heads and have tattoos covering their bodies, now that they're in their Macklemore haircuts with their khaki pants and their Fred Perry shirts and looking very preppy, will they actually pull people out of the mainstream conservative movement who feel like, oh yeah, 2050, the country is going away, we got to drain the swamp, the president said so. And so that's the fear, is that we have something that starts to look like Germany in the early 1930s, where we have this guy who's saying, here's the fake media, and so
Diminishing the power of media.
yeah, so in a way, this work, it's not meant as a joke, but when I started this work 30 years ago, I was studying kind of a marginalized population. It was sort of interesting, these crazy skinheads, and occasionally there'd be a movie or a murder or something, and I'd get called into duty to talk about it. Now I'm talking about something that's part of the political mainstream, and it is chilling. And so I feel, in a way, while it was sort of, you know, a unique niche to study, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Now I'm talking about, you know, I'm going to this panel today with the American Bar Association of how do lawyers manage the rise of white nationalism in America. So this is the Bar Association, and it's a sellout room because they want to know, how the hell do we manage this as lawyers? And this is both prosecuting lawyers and criminal defense lawyers. So it's now this big thing, and here we are, and we're talking.
What keeps you going?
Yeah, I asked myself that on Tuesday when I was being accused of being a white supremacist, white liberal.
Which is like out of all the people.
Well, because, you know, I mean, I grew up in a white supremacist society. I grew up with racism. Racism is in me, and so I'm constantly working on it. And sometimes it is uncomfortable, and sometimes there is a value to be called out for trying to speak for other people instead of letting them speak for themselves. Called out in this case of using humor when I should have been more thoughtful about how my words might hurt. And so the whole concept of microaggression, right? This is something that I have to learn more about, because there is a cumulative effect of getting that scratch. You know, one scratch. This is the example that was used. One scratch you can handle, but you get that scratch all day, every day, it's going to start to bleed. So me monitoring that and working on that is an important part. So,
which is good that you are aware and you are not just fighting against. They try to learn and research, which is, I mean,
it's about a lot of it is about. I mean, this gets very psychological, but it's about sort of pulling your ego down and not always being defensive and saying, "Well, I was just joking," or "But I've been working on this for 30 years," or "But I voted for Jesse Jackson." You know, like it's not about sort of defending myself or being in a defensive position. It's being willing to say, yeah, I might be wrong. And I think for a lot of people that's very hard, especially in our social media platforms. We're always defensive and battling all the time. And one of my conservative friends, we were arguing about Puerto Rico today, and I mentioned, you know, Ted Cruz is a Puerto Rican, and I remembered he's actually Cuban. You know, and then before I could change it, the conservative friend said, no, he's Cuban. I said, yeah, you're right. And for him, that was like
a victory.
Yeah, no, but it was also me saying, hey, you know, I'm willing to, you know, I'm not going to go, well, he's 1/3 Puerto Rican. I'm not going to try to argue it. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I was wrong. And there was this moment there where it was like, ooh. You know, he's like, sometimes you can be right. I can disagree with you, and you can be right. So there is that part of the process, which I think is hard, and I think it's hard especially for straight, white, cisgendered males who have all the privilege to say, you know, maybe I should just listen and hear and not react.
But the difference, because I'm an outsider, I mean, not always I'm born here, I feel that the difference between you and other people that you are at least willing to understand, kind of learn about
most
yourself.
Of the time, some of the time I am that defensive a-hole. You know, I do say, I'm the expert, I have a PhD, listen to me. So,
which you do, I mean, you still have to take it. When we're talking about someone who's been studying for 30 years, of course you know more than a lot of people. It doesn't.
Yeah, but I still have. I mean, I think I've learned more from my students over the years on real key issues, including about things like sexual orientation, and you know, it's a constant process. So I have this motto that I use, which is we're all works in progress. Like we're all, because sociologists believe, we're born blank slates, and then the environment helps to create who we are. We're all works in progress, so let's get to work. If you recognize that you are on a path, then you can think about where you want to go. What direction do I want to go? Because I was reflecting when I was on this panel the other night that a lot of my classmates at Emory University went to law school, or they went to Wall Street, or they went into the medical profession. They're making a lot of money and probably voting straight Republican. And I decided to take a different path. But it doesn't mean that I have to forget about where I'm going, because I'm still on the path. I'm not on it. I'm not to the end until I drop dead. So I have to and I was reminded of that the other night. That I still have to be mindful of where I want to go and not think that I'm already there.
Right. Just in a different way. We're saying basically in a different way, you are also learning as they are.
Yeah.
No right or wrong, it's just learning, right?
Right.
Okay. Which kind of information do you remember that you had growing up where you did, for example, like in terms of race, and which kind of, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my primary one that I was taught to fear black people.
Okay.
I was taught that black people were criminals and a threat, and I have a very clear memory of a Christmas shopping moment when I was probably about 10 years old, and I was with my dad, and he was trying to do some last-minute shopping, like dads always do, and we were part of DeKalb County, which is the county my town was in. It was the black part of town, and he wanted to stop into a Kmart or something, and it was in the black part of town, and I would not get out of the car. I was so afraid. I would not get out of the car to go in because all I saw were black faces.
How old were you, more or less?
Yeah, like 10, probably 10, 9 or 10. And then my dad, thanks to him, sort of dragged me into the store and dropped me in the toy section because he knows that was my safe space. And I found some toys, and there was a little African-American boy who liked the same toys that I like. I think we were playing with G.I. Joes. And all of a sudden, it was like, oh, wow, this kid feels the same thing. We have this immediate bond. And I felt, as a 9-year-old, I felt like this shame of like, what? Why? And my dad came back and he just laughed. He's like, do you want to go? And I'm like, no, we're playing. But that was a very visceral, emotional moment. And I think the emotional thing is key to it because we're often responding to these issues on a very emotional level. I'm so afraid. And then you find out, what are you afraid? So I've had a number of those I call getting it moments. I wrote a piece on my blog about I worked at a record store. I got a job at a record store when I was 16, which is the coolest job in the world when you're a 16-year-old. And everybody got tickets to see B.B. King, the blues great.
Yeah.
And we got really good tickets because we knew the promoter. So we were a group of us, record store people, and the crowd was, this is Atlanta, Georgia, so it was almost all African American. And I just had that emotional, like, oh, I had never been in a situation like I was in a minority before, except for that Kmart store. And I just had this sort of emotional, like, feeling nervous, like what's going to happen. And I was sitting next to this large African American woman in a big purple hat, and she, God bless her, just looked at me like this scared white kid. It was like, what am I doing? And put her arm around me and said, honey, you're going to have a great time. And it all melted away. And then I had that sense of sort of shame and like, why? And I did, and it was one of those moments for me where like, that's it. I need to bust through this. So this was while I was still going to this Clantown high school, right? So, and then I ended up in the sociology class and got the tools by which to figure out what all that was about and started on the path. So yeah, there was those emotions. Yeah.
It's funny because
the woman in the purple hat. I wonder where she is now.
We need more encounters like that, and I push myself to do that. I mean, I don't have the background that you have, but I know the fear that's happening here. So I'm proud that I was telling my wife that I was driving on 82nd, and this guy had this very gangster car style, and he was driving. This kind of guy, I don't know if he was a troublemaker. He wanted to look like a troublemaker, and he was driving, trying to find ways to, I don't know, argue, who knows, and he had his face. And I was trying to figure out like how people react when we have something in common. I think the same thing was a toy, and I don't love cars, but I appreciate when someone takes care of the car. That's something in Brazil we do a lot.
All right.
So I put my window down and I said, hey, and the guy looked at me and said, nice car. And it was enough, it was honest from my side, and it was enough for him to say, didn't you like this? It's 78, and he started having this conversation on the traffic light.
Yeah, there you go.
And I was so proud of that. Wow, I mean, fear can stop like that
Yeah.
if we have the courage to put yourself a bit further. Just
Well,
push
there's this
yourself.
great thing that's happening now. It's called the Meet a Muslim program, where these guys go out and they just have like signs that say Meet a Muslim, and they go into sort of non-Muslim areas and say, hey, do you have any questions? And it's a great way of saying, you want to talk about Sharia law, you want to talk about gender, you want to talk about who Allah is. I mean, it's just this idea of having that personal contact, and because it's so easy. We're in such a divided. I mean, the studies are looking at the numbers now, how we see ourselves more and more in separate silos.
Right.
So those moments to break out. So that part of my role as the chair of the Oregon Coalition Against Hate Crimes is, how do we bring people together around the table, or in community settings.
Right. Huh.
Yeah.
How do you keep yourself happy?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Because
Well,
you work, I mean, I think I asked you
yeah.
before, like you been studying and researching, dealing with this heavy information.
Well, that's a good question. I'll give you the real answer in a second, but part of it is you have to have a sense of humor. I laugh for crying, laugh for not crying. But sometimes that sense of humor is misinterpreted by people. When I'm trying to joking about Nazis or something, and it's like that's inappropriate. Because the left is very dogmatic, and the left, even though they may joke among themselves, is kind of in a way. I don't want to generalize, but there's a sort of humorless element to it. You can't joke about these things; they're serious. If I didn't joke about it, I would have quit a long time ago. So, humor is a part of it. For me, the big issue now is I'm a parent, and I have a 3-year-old biracial daughter. So I think about her experience with sexism and racism, and how I want her to be able to exist in this world. And so that to me, so that's a motivation, but also gives me great joy, because she's just 3 is this incredible age where she just has lots of opinions and has lots of passions about things, including the Paw Patrol. Any other parents out there know about the Paw Patrol? So that's, and then music. I mean, music was the thing that brought me into this at the very beginning. And so it was very interesting about the music, because I grew up in a house full of music, but my parents weren't very clear about the connection between the music that they loved and black culture. So there was a lot of jazz, but there was a lot of jazz by white guys. So I grew up on Dave Brubeck, which is great music, but it's rooted in, or my dad loved sort of 50s rock and roll, and we had like one Chuck Berry single, but mostly Elvis and stuff like that. And so it was, so I grew up with this intense love of music. There always has to be a record spinning in my house. It's just like the flow of life. And then when I realized that all the music that I love, when I got that job at the record store, they're like, do you like that? I'm like, Dave Brubeck. They said, do you know about Charlie Parker, John Coltrane?
Like a real jazz?
Yeah. And they said, do you like blues? And I said, yeah, Eric Clapton. And they said, well, there's Muddy Waters. And so it's like, oh my God, all the music that I love, including the Beatles, right? They were doing Motown songs when they first came out. Twist and Shout, right? Is an old black American R&B song. So the music to me is always keeps me going. Yeah, and it connects it all together.
Being a local, being here in Portland, what do you think that has to be done here in Portland for us to reach a higher level of quality of society?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and it's a difficult question because on some levels we do have quality. We have a relatively low crime rate. We don't have a lot of intense poverty like places like Atlanta, where I come from, do. So on certain metrics, we do have that. The problem is the bubble aspect of Portlandia, is that we tend to not know our history. So understanding the history of why Portland is so white and Oregon is so white is part of it, but also just sort of more interaction. And I think it's inevitable. I think we are becoming more diverse, and the fact that we had a sold-out audience at Race Talks, and sold out was free, but packed room, it means that there are a lot of people who are engaged, and it's just so. But to be happier, I think the big problem. And there's so many big problems, but the big problem is social media is working to disconnect us. And it is so much more satisfying to get out and meet your neighbors than sit, doing this all day or this all day. We had a street painting event on our street where we did an intersection. We painted an intersection. People came out for 2 days. It was so much fun to meet my neighbors, to not be, some people were, taking selfies in front of the painting, but for the most part, unplugging and having that face-to-face interaction. And I think that's something that's global. I think that's a global problem. So the more we do that, the more opportunities we have to meet people outside of our bubble. It used to be, when my parents came from an era where it was all about bowling. My parents met in a bowling alley. And so bowling in the early 1960s, everybody, working class people all went
social
bowling. Yeah, it was a
thing.
social thing. It
Yeah.
was very social. All those bowling alleys are closing down because everybody's doing this, including me, right? And not going out and bowling and having those social interactions. So I think that anytime that, I think there's a craving for it.
I was gonna say, like, because I've been studying happiness or whatever makes people thrive or be happier for 12 years, I see, and being from abroad, I feel that Portland, especially people here, they want to be part of a community, they want this connection,
Yeah, yeah.
but we don't know how.
Right.
And takes conversation, takes people like, oh, that's how we're supposed to do. But one thing I was going to say, you lived in Europe. One thing that I loved in Europe was they had a square.
Sure.
Plaza,
All right.
Plaza, whatever
Piazza.
you call it, Piazza in Spain or Italy. And even in England, they have parks and people do that
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
And here there's a lack of space, so the
Yeah.
street fair
Good
in the
point.
summer is packed.
Right.
But I was wondering how different it would be if we had 2 blocks in every district where just pedestrian zone, where people could actually get together, no cars, just there.
Yeah, I've argued. My wife is from this beautiful town in Mexico called, it's in Michoacan, it's called Morelia, and they have an ancient lover's lane. It's a street where people just after dinner you go kind of walk down this beautiful street. It has some statues. There's always sort of like teenagers smooching, and it's just this sort of nice trees over the top. And I was like, God, Portland had a place like that where we could just. I mean, we do have the water, and this city is very intentional in trying to create community. We just need more of it to get people out into it.
There are so many. I love that you mentioned that. Waterfront is not a place like that, because a place like that, it has to have businesses and the community together. There are no need to cross the street to go to any business, and besides, there are no many businesses.
Yeah, right.
So it has to be a square with businesses and people and community get together.
And cafes.
In cafes, sometimes in Brazil you have a lot of churches, or in front of the church is always a plaza, a little square. People go sometimes to the mass, sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
But there is a place where people get together.
Right.
With,
And I think the city understands. So we have the Office of Neighborhood Involvement that a lot of owning that a lot of cities don't have. And one of the things that it does is encourages and helps to facilitate street parties. So if you want to shut your street down from traffic, they will help you set it up and make sure that there are blockades. And
can I close the street for good?
well, that's what you're saying. That's something that's a permanent. What if Alberta was just pedestrian?
Or 2 blocks only. 2 blocks on Alberta, 2
Right.
blocks on Hawthorne, 2 blocks.
Yeah. There are great streets. Dublin has a great city like that called Grafton Street, and that's where you go.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't have anything to do. Let's go down to Grafton Street. There's tea houses and.
In fact, I don't know if you know, the city, there are many studies, but Gallup has been doing the biggest research about wellness in the world. So they study in US, went through to analyze the city that's thriving. And the last years, one of the cities that's been there always is San Luis Obispo in California.
Really?
Yes. And what they figured out that in the 70s it was just like a normal city. In the 80s or 90s, I don't remember, they decided it was a conscious choice. They decided to put that together. So they actually created a pedestrian zone.
Oh, wow.
They closed some
Really?
streets and they changed completely.
Wow.
I thought it was super interesting.
Yeah, it's a beautiful little town. My grandmother lived and died there.
Oh.
So, that would be a great place to do. It's all on fire right now, but
It is?
well, these wildfires in Northern California are just that's it's not far from there.
Okay.
So that's cool though.
Yeah.
I love that idea. And it's funny because when Last Thursday happens, which is our little street monthly in the summertime, a lot of locals complain. More than once there's been someone urinating in my front yard. So, and the traffic and that. But also I wouldn't trade it. I like it because there are people coming out, and who cares why they're coming out? Some people are there because they want to take a selfie on Alberta and show their friends how cool they are.
Right.
But it is an opportunity. I mean, it's sort of, there's a tipping point on these things. So initially it was the neighbors would come out and the kids would come out and file in on the street. It's become kind of a little bit, although I think it's starting to die down a little. But there's
mainly because before it used to be organized by the community.
Yeah,
Now,
right.
like previous
By the
mayor,
city.
like it took over.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. So there is a way to do it. So I'm glad I moved into this neighborhood 20 years ago when it was a very different place. There were a couple of galleries maybe, but all this was all mostly empty. So it's exciting. And there's this whole picture about how gentrification uproots communities too. That's a whole other discussion. But yeah, hanging out on the street, that's the solution.
Yeah, yeah.
The thing that your mother didn't want you to do.
I know. Well, we did it, even in São Paulo, it's a big city. I was a street boy, kind of thing, like playing soccer all day long, come back, later.
Yeah.
It was a thing, but I was trying to figure out if there was, how do you see, let me change the question. How do you see, if you could choose, if you had some kind of higher power come choose, like you can find a way, you can help and choose ways to make our community, not even talk about the whole Portland, let's think about Alberta region. What would you change?
Well, there are a couple pieces to that. I mean, one is we have an issue with homelessness, and that affects kind of everything you want to do. So our town square, Pioneer Square, if you want to spend time there, you're also going to be sharing the space with a lot of houseless people, I guess as we're saying now. And that's starting to happen here in Alberta. There's a guy sleeping on the corner of my street, and it's very sad. In the rain, he's in a sleeping bag, and so the issue of affordable housing is key. You can't live in this neighborhood. I could never buy my house now that I bought 20 years ago. It's crazy. It's worth over $500,000, which is insane to me. I've mortgaged it a few times since then, so I couldn't sell it for that much. But that's another story. But for people, one of the things that made this community great when I moved into it is that it was possible for a 21-year-old to have a job at a pizza place and rent a room in a house with 3 other roommates, and you would have a roof over your head and you would live in a community. And it's just, those people have been pushed away. There used to be like 3 bands on my street. You can hear them practicing in the basement. They're all gone. So the issue of affordable housing to me is key. How you do that is hard because what we're seeing is old houses being knocked down and apartment complexes being put in their place, and so then you destroy the character of the neighborhood because you want to have, 8 places to live instead of 1 place to live in the
Which
same
I'm
space.
surprised the city doesn't have any laws or rules against
Well,
that.
we do. Well, it's a response to our growth boundary that we can't grow out like Atlanta did. Atlanta was just sprawl, so we grow out. We go up Mount Hood, and we have subdivisions all the way to the top of the mountain. So we have to infill, and so that means some of the old character goes away.
Yeah, I'm thinking more about the structure of the
what they look like.
how they look
Yeah.
like, because now I have this super square house, just a box, and it's. I still remember, like in Italy, they have some cities, not all, but in Florence they have this rule where the house needs to be the same color. There's a palette of colors you can use to keep the character of the city.
Yeah, I wonder because if you're a fan of architecture, you can go through this neighborhood and see, well, that house was built in the 1920s, that house was built in the 1990s, that's from the 1980s, and I wonder. Somebody living in this neighborhood 100 years from now, when they look at the stuff that's being built now, how they'll think, why did people think that was
nice.
aesthetically appealing, would look good next to these old houses, these craftsman houses? So yeah, to me, the first thing that pops in my head is how can you bring lower income people back into the neighborhood without destroying the character of the physical character, the architecture, and that. So that's a challenge. The economy may do that for us. I mean, we may have a housing bust, right? The economy goes up and goes down. I'm not wishing for it because I would lose equity in my house. But the economy may do that, and you can buy a house in Detroit for cheap, or Baltimore. I mean, there are plenty of places in America where the population is moving out. So there's no rule that says Portland can't experience that. I mean, I think we're kind of safe just because we have water here.
Yeah.
Everything else is
I
going to
know.
dry up. We're still going to be at least relatively wet. So yeah, that's to me that's the big thing. Is those are we think of this as a bohemian neighborhood, but bohemian people can't afford to live here anymore.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah, they're all gone. They're
Where are they going to?
well, I think that's a good question. That's a secret. Because once you say, but I think anywhere you find sort of lower income, especially immigrant populations. I mean, Bohemia was the Latin Quarter of Paris in the 1840s because the Bohemians from what is now the Czech Republic were living there, and they were the quote-unquote gypsies, and the artists wanted to be like the gypsies.
Oh, I
So
didn't
they
know
named
that.
themselves because that was the cheap place to live. You know, when the French Revolution happened, all of the artists lost their bourgeois patronage, so they had to develop a new idea of art for art's sake. This is Victor Hugo and Chagall and like a lot of the Impressionist painters, and you have to suffer for your art. Well, I like to call it the Keith Richards approach, right? You have to kind of be down. So Oscar Wilde said, "All of us are in the gutter, but some of us are looking up at the stars." It's a classic Bohemian quote. So they moved, and so if you think about Greenwich Village in New York, or North Beach, or Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, I mean, the artists tend to gravitate to where the cheap places are to live, and so this has been a key example of that Bohemia. But once it's successful, then the other people move in, and then the Bohemian, the actual artists, can't afford to live there anymore, so they have to go somewhere else.
Which is interesting because once the art goes away, people don't want to be here anymore, so you go down a little bit, right? House.
It becomes kind of institutionalized. So North Beach and Haight-Ashbury are still cool neighborhoods, but at the corner of Haight-Ashbury, there's a Ben and Jerry's and a Gap. So it's only a matter of time before we have a Starbucks in Alberta. And there was a thing, I guess it was about 10 or 12 years ago, someone on April 1st on an abandoned building put up these really nice signs that said, "Coming soon, Alberta Starbucks."
Wow.
And people freaked out, and the anarchists were like, "Burn the building down." And it was a joke, right? It was a prank, but there's that reaction. But I think if you did that now, there people would be like, "Oh, okay."
For sure. I saw, for the first time I saw a Mercedes here in Alberta.
Yeah.
What?
We had a tienda on our block, a beautiful Mexican tienda, Don Pancho's. We made great burritos. That's where we bought our vegetables, and it's now sort of a craft beer. Yeah, it's gone. The whole building has been gentrified. So that's just the shape of things.
No. So the last question. I mean,
Okay.
there's so much we can talk
Yeah,
forever.
I tend to talk a lot.
But it's
as
why
an
I tend to
academic.
ask.
Sorry.
I think to ask a lot. I'm curious anyway by nature. One question that I think can help us to see the future, and especially because you have a daughter, and I love to talk to parents because they have a vision that I don't have. I can see my
It really
future.
does change. I mean,
Right.
I heard that so long, and I waited a long time to become a parent. Oh, it'll be different when you're a parent. And I said, no, I'll be the same. No,
Is it different?
it really does. You think it's all about that little person.
So think about that little person. Which kind of society? And I don't like to go that big, like a world and everything. I do believe that we change our world when we change our family, even our neighborhood. So which kind of community you'd like to live or give to your daughter?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that pops in my head is I want her to be safe. Especially as a female and as a Latina, I want her to be safe. But I also want there to be that connective tissue between neighbors. That's the reason I bought the house that I bought in the 90s is it has a front porch. Because where I come from in Georgia, you sit on your front porch and you say hi to everybody that walks by. And you see all your neighbors and you have that sense of connective tissue. When I moved into the house, there was a house catty corner to mine, and I saw them looking at me, trying to figure out who I was, this still single guy. And then 2 days later, they brought over a pie to welcome me to the neighborhood. And I almost broke into tears because that's that sense of community that I want. So I want her to have that notion that if she needs a cup of sugar, she can go across the street. But also if she needs emotional support, that's there in the community as well. And that it sort of supports her and her ability to have whatever path she wants to take. So if she wants to be creative, of course, I want to have that to be nurtured in a creative place. If she wants to go and come back, go off to college or go live abroad and come back, and to her to have that community is a sense of, I don't want to say unchanging, but a sort of consistent notion that that's her place.
Right.
So,
Like that. And in fact, I experienced that. I mean, I was born and grew up in the same building in São Paulo, so every time I go back to Brazil, which is pretty much every year, people in the building, they know me, been knowing me for 30-something years, they knew when I got my first girlfriend, so there's a sense of, people for sure move, but There's still a sense of home. Like, I see
It
that.
can be very supportive, and we live in a world where people come and go a lot. So my neighborhood has changed. Although there were some of us that have, it's funny because we always define the area once we got there. So I'm an original.
Right.
I'm original. I mean, I came in the '90s, so
The veterans.
right. But
Yeah.
right, of course, there are people looking at me who've been here for 50 years and like, oh,
Yeah.
the guys that came in the '90s, one of the gentrifiers. But those people that kind of stay, that we are really connected, and it is so wonderful to be in a neighborhood where I know my neighbors, and it just feels like an extended family. So
I like that.
yeah.
Oh, there is one last thing
Nope.
that is important to mention. Last time I talked to you, we were talking about news and how much news create a little bit of fear.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something that stayed in my mind. You said Portland, Oregon, remember, imports news from other places. Can you just
Yeah, well,
share a little bit about
I think it's relevant because we do have a relatively low crime rate, but local news especially is driven by this motto, if it bleeds, it leads. So they want to hook people at the beginning. There's a whole science to how you attract people to stick around for the commercial. So you front load the news with lots of blood and guts and murder and terrorism. And since we don't have a lot of that here, knock on beautiful Brazilian wood, hope this didn't come from a rainforest, the local news companies will use news stories from outside of Portland, even outside the state, to put high on the news. It's usually something local first, and then it goes into some horror story from Texas or from Milwaukee that, some horrible thing that happened, often very racially charged as well, to get people to watch, caught on camera, that type of thing. And so it does elevate the level of fear. There are studies that show the more news you watch, the more fearful you are, and the less you actually know about your own community, because you're inside watching the news and oh my god, which is on for hours now, right? We can just sort of watch it for hours, and instead of engaging in your community, you're inside freaking yourself out. So I'm, it's funny because I get asked by TV reporters, how do we handle all this bad news, and I tell them, turn off the bad news. Including your channel.
Yeah.
They're like, I know. I mean, they understand it, right? Because they're part of it. And they're working, and they're told what to do. I mean, everybody is sort of a piece in the machine. But yeah. It's just so easy in our brains, and this is, I hate to keep referring to the research, but we are rewiring our brains with all this electronic stimuli, and so it becomes addictive. And I can't stop watching the news from Las Vegas, or I can't, it's just like this constant thing. And I'm guilty of it too, and it's so easy now because I don't have to be in front of the TV. I can just pull out my phone and be like, what likes did I get since the last time I looked? And so we are rewiring our brain, and so it's going to take leadership, somebody really cool, Bono or somebody to say, hey, turn off this video, go outside.
That'd be awesome.
And
one of the ideas of doing more of these things is to bring
if people are watching this on their screens.
No, it's not live. Don't
turn it off though. Not yet.
Not yet. But to bring good conversations to the table, because I feel, and the conversation with my wife is the same. I'm pushing myself and my friends to consume and share, especially share good news.
Yeah.
And then my wife said, well, but the world, this is fake because the world is not all good. My side is that, but the world is also not all bad.
Right,
we just see the bad side. At least by doing that, we balance out a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So that's the idea.
Yeah. And sharing good things about our lives as well.
Right.
Good news about, and there is that part of Facebook as well, where people are sharing their little moments of happiness. I mean, I have so many conservative friends that just say, just post more pictures of your daughter. I'm like, okay.
That's a neutral zone.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I can do that.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for
I'm glad
that.
to be able to have this conversation.
Very inspiring. Any research resource that you'd like to share? People check it out, or
well, I would just encourage people to make sure that they know everybody around in the building or the apartment that they live in, to know people around them. I mean, the best research is to talk to someone, especially someone who's older than you, about their story in Portland or their story in their life, and to take that moment instead of thinking I got to get in because my show's on, or I feel uncomfortable. To have a moment and say, hey, I've never really asked you, did you grow up here? Are you from here? To have that, people love to talk about themselves, right? So to have that is so not just engaging, but there are endorphins that go off in the brain when somebody says, "Oh, somebody's interested in me."
Right.
So
And
yeah,
you might discover that we have more things in common than we think.
Yeah.
We're not that different
Yeah,
as society's trying to push us away. Yeah.
yeah.
Nice. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. We're happy with it.
All right, I like it.
Thanks,
Cool.
yeah.
All right, I'm gonna finish my cheese bread.
Yeah.